Paratmanamekam jagadbijamadyam niriham nirakaram omkaravedyam yato jayate palyate yena vishvam tamisham bhaje liyate yatra vishvam. Hari Om Tat Sat. Hari Om Tat Sat. Hari Om Tat Sat. Dear devotees, today I have been asked to address you all for this Japa Yajna, which is being organized by Ramakrishna Mission Ashram, Belgaum, for which I am thankful to Swami Atma Prananandaji, and I offer my pranams to him. And I have been asked to share with you the ideas which will be in general beneficial for all spiritual aspirants. One devotee approached Sri Ramakrishna and asked him the question, Thakur, how can we fix our mind on God? In reply to this question, Sri Ramakrishna told 5 beautiful points in which he shows us the way in a very comprehensive manner by which a spiritual aspirant will be eventually and gradually in a position to fix his mind on Bhagavan. And if you look into those 5 points given by Sri Ramakrishna, we can see that Sri Ramakrishna takes all the beautiful prescriptions found in the scriptures, which have been elaborately discussed and prescribed by all the great past masters in our tradition. And he puts forth all of that in a very comprehensive manner. The first thing which Sri Ramakrishna says is that in Bengali he says, Bhagavanir Nam Gunagan Kora. Repeating the name of Bhagavan and singing his glories. Second point he says is to have sadhu sangha. Third point he says is the spiritual aspirants, those who want to commune with Bhagavan, those who want to experience Bhagavan, they should go into solitude once in a while. Fourth point which he says is that the spiritual aspirant has to practice viveka and vairagya. And the last point he says that the spiritual aspirant should live in the world in a detached manner. Just like a maidservant who stays in the rich man's house and looks after the affairs of the rich man, but actually does all her work in an absolutely detached manner. So in these 5 points, we find Sri Ramakrishna's very practical and comprehensive prescription meant to help every spiritual aspirant move towards the experience of Bhagavan in our hearts. Let me start with the third point which Sri Ramakrishna has prescribed. That is the need for spiritual aspirants to go into solitude once in a while. This is precisely what you all, my dear devotees, you are doing here in this Japa Yajna. You have taken time away from your usual humdrum involvements, and you have decided to come for this Japa Yajna, and you have come to a place where you are away from all your so-called worldly concerns, worldly relationships, and here in a totally different setup and environment where there are no intrusions from the so-called the worldly side of our life, where it is an ashram or it's a temple, where you have Sri Ramakrishna's image in front of you, and in that beautiful ambience, you are trying to fix your mind on your Ishta. This going into this kind of a solitude, where you don't have any disturbances coming from the worldly side, and where your mind is fixed on Bhagavan, this is very essential for all spiritual aspirants to practice once in a while. When we continuously live in a worldly surrounding, our mind tends to become completely mixed up with worldly things, and it loses its capacity and the fitness to perceive and experience the supreme reality called Bhagavan, which resides in our heart. And we lose sight of this and we get lost in the ocean of this world. So Sri Ramakrishna gives a beautiful example. He says that this mind is like a milk and the world is like the water. And if the milk is put into the water, the milk becomes useless. Similarly, the milk, which is here compared with the mind which is like the milk, if this mind is straight away put into the world, it becomes useless as far as experience and perception of Bhagavan is concerned. It loses that capacity. So, Sri Ramakrishna says, just like the milk, if it is turned into curd, and then from that curd you churn butter, and then if you place that butter in water, the butter doesn't get dissolved in the water, and rather the butter comfortably floats in the water. Similarly, Sri Ramakrishna says, this mind has to be churned, and the butter of bhakti and jnana has to be extracted from the milk of the mind. And once we have this bhakti and jnana in our hearts, then we can keep this mind in the world. The mind won't dissolve or get mixed up with the water of the world. The mind will easily float. The person will easily float without getting carried away by the currents of the world. So that is the beautiful comparison which Sri Ramakrishna places before us, by which we can understand the importance of cultivating bhakti and jnana in our life. Once the mind is filled with bhakti, then there is nothing to fear. And this bhakti is one-pointed prema for Bhagavan. This is something invaluable. The greatest treasure of the human life is this Bhagavat Prem. A person who has got this Bhagavat Prem, he is the richest person in this creation. He is a truly rich man. The true treasure he has got, Bhagavat Prem, or the intense longing to be one with the reality in our hearts. So, this need to once in a while come away from our worldly surrounding and engage ourselves in communing with the reality in our hearts is extremely important. This solitude, this turning away from our worldly concerns once in a while and focusing our mind on that reality in our heart is a very important step for every spiritual aspirant. Now let me take the first point. Sri Ramakrishna, the first point which he prescribes is the repetition of God's name. Today all of you have come here for Japa Yajna. This is a Yajna of the Japam. Japam means repetition of the mantra, the Ishta mantra. This is a very powerful means to slowly come in touch with that ultimate reality residing in our hearts. Sri Ramakrishna gives a very beautiful example in this regard. He says that in the Ganges, Sri Ramakrishna is taking this example from his own surroundings in Kolkata of those days in West Bengal. Often the timber, the huge logs of wood, are sunk in the Ganges water. And these huge pieces of timber or logs of wood, they are fastened, they are tied with a chain, and they are tied to a pole on the bank. The timber is sunk and it is not visible on the surface, it is sunk deep in the Ganges. But through a chain, it is tied to a pole on the bank. Now, Sri Ramakrishna says, a beautiful example, he says that if a person wants to reach the timber, he has to hold the chain and link by link proceed towards the timber and go inside the water. The timber is not visible on the surface, it is sunk in the water. To reach that timber, you need the help of the chain. And by holding onto this chain, bit by bit, link by link, the person proceeds and slowly, finally, he reaches the timber. The repetition of our Ishta mantra is like the chain. Every repetition is like a link, holding on to which the spiritual aspirant slowly leaves the surface of his mind, slowly goes away from the surface of this world, and slowly begins to proceed towards the deeper and deeper dimensions of his own personality inside his own heart. In this way, holding on to this Ishta mantra, which is like the chain, the spiritual aspirant slowly proceeds. And that Bhagavan, which is deeply sunk in the heart of the devotee and spiritual aspirant, just like the wood which is completely sunk in the water, it is not visible outside. To reach there, one needs the help of the chain. Similarly, the Bhagavan who is completely hidden inside the heart of the spiritual aspirant, to reach there, the depth of the spiritual consciousness, one needs the help of this chain of Japam. In and through this Bhakti Purvak repetition of Bhagavan's name, we slowly begin to move towards that infinite reality, our Ishta in our hearts, and finally we reach there and get the Ishta Darshanam. Sri Ramakrishna says, in and through the repetition of Bhagavan's name, the end is Ishta Darshanam. One gets the first-hand experience of our own Ishta. Holy Mother, Sri Sharda Devi says that you repeat this Ishta mantra 15 to 20,000 times a day. Do it every day for a certain period of time and see for yourself what will happen. Without doing this, one should not complain. She says that I have experienced it. If one repeats this mantra 15 to 20,000 times a day, very soon, in the course of time, that person will succeed in coming in touch with this reality in one's own heart. Of course, this also implies the fulfillment of certain conditions. We should remember that, which is what actually Sri Ramakrishna has pointed out in his 5 points. On the one side, if we are repeating the mantra, and at the same time, if you don't have viveka and vairagya, such repetition of mantra will not give the kind of result which is expected. So, this repetition of mantra, this japam, has to be backed by viveka and vairagya. It has to be backed by a detachment from the worldly things. We have to free our mind from the moha for the worldly things. These are two different things. The infatuation for worldly things is one direction of human mind, and the other direction is Bhagavat Prem, love for Bhagavan and Bhagavan alone. This Bhagavat Prem, love for Bhagavan and Bhagavan alone, is impossible as long as we have infatuation for the things of the world. That is why there is a need to turn away from the things of the world, to rise above all this moha, sansarik moha, and then focus our mind in and through prema, in and through love, towards Bhagavan residing in our own hearts. So this repetition of mantra is a great practice which can be seen in the lives of any number of saints, especially the saints who have practiced, who have been treading the path of Bhakti Marga. We have great saints in India. You can take any number of names. Mirabai, Andal, Tukaram, Namdev, Eknath. And one very important name which comes to my mind in this context is a saint from Maharashtra whose name was Chokhamela. I would like to just refer his story in brief, which is very inspiring when it comes to the practice of repetition of Bhagavan's name, when it comes to the practice of Japa. Chokhamela was a saint belonging to Maharashtra of the 15th century, and he was a contemporary of great Maharashtrian saints of that time like Namdev and Gyaneshwar and others. Chokhamela's parents were very pious and they were great devotees of Vitthala. You may be knowing that there is a very famous temple in Maharashtra at Pandharpur, and this Pandharpur is also known as Dakshin Kashi, the southern Kashi. It is one of the most sacred spots in India as far as spirituality is concerned and the places of pilgrimage is concerned. So here at Pandharpur, many saints have been associated in and through their devotion for this great awakened deity of Pandharpur, known as Vitthala. He is also known as Vithoba, and he is a form of Vishnu. Vishnu is referred to Vitthala there in the local terminology. So, Chokhamela's parents, they were great devotees of Vithoba or Vitthala. To them, this small baby was born, who was named as Chokhamela, and Chokhamela, right from his childhood, manifested this great trait, this great quality of having a natural love for this deity called Vithoba or Vitthala. So right from this childhood, this baby was seen to be deeply attracted towards Vitthala. And as his parents were also very pious, he had seen his parents' devotion and devoted life. This child Chokhamela also started repeating the name of Vitthala. The one thing which was seen in his life was unceasing repetition of Bhagavan's name, which is the first point referred by Sri Ramakrishna. This Chokhamela would repeat Vitthala's name always, no matter what this boy was doing. Always the repetition of Bhagwan's name would go on in his mind. Vitthala, 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 Jai Hari Vitthala, Shri Hari Vitthala, 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 Vitthala. This would go on and on and on and on. In this way, this boy grew up. He grew up, and as he began to proceed and evolve in his spiritual practices, this Vitthala became a living deity for him. It was no more an image in the temple. He used to directly commune with this deity called Vitthala. Later on, he married, he had his own son, and in spite of that, none of these worldly engagements could distract his attention from this deity. His family, his wife, and his son was on the one side, and they were all very devoted. But his one pointed devotion to Vitthala and Vitthala alone, that was uncompromising. There are many incidents related to Chokhamela's life. We won't be going into the details of that. But one very striking incident which I would like to mention here is that the way he died and what happened after that. Chokhamela, as he was a poor man and he was a laborer, once what happened in Pandharpur, there was the need to erect a huge wall. And in this erection of this huge wall, many laborers were involved and they were working day in and day out to construct this wall. So, in the process of constructing this wall, unfortunately, this wall collapsed one day, and many of the laborers they died under the rubble of this wall. So Chokhamela also was one of them who came under the collapsed wall and he died. But Chokhamela was the dearest devotee of Vitthala. He was dear to Vitthala. So Vitthala, the living deity of that town, comes in the dream of another very saint of that very place and tells him, "My dear, please see to it that Chokhamela's bones are retrieved from the rubble and the bones are properly cremated." Vitthala is coming in the dream of a very noble person and instructing him to ensure that Chokhamela's body and his bones are properly and duly cremated according to the scriptural injunction. Now, this person who was instructed by Vitthala, he asked this question to Vitthala that, "Bhagavan, how am I going to understand that this is Chokhamela's bone? Because everything is mixed up inside under the rubble, and how am I going to understand which is Chokhamela's bones? Because many people have died there. And how do I distinguish Chokhamela's bone? How do I recognize that this is Chokhamela's bone?" So Bhagavan says, Vitthala says, "You do one thing. You take all the bones one by one, and each bone you place it close to your ears. That bone from which you will hear the name of Vitthala echoing and resounding, that bone belongs to Chokhamela." So this was the instruction given by Vitthala to that person. That person accordingly goes and begins to look for the bones under the rubble. And one by one he takes the bones and keeps it close to his ears. Many of the bones he didn't find any name of Vitthala resounding in that. But as he went on looking for the bones of Chokhamela, he came across a set of bones, which when he kept close to his ears, he found that inside the bone, the Japam, the name of Bhagavan, resounding and echoing. Vittala, 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 Jai Hari Vittala, Shri Hari Vittala, Jai Hari Vittala, Shri Hari Vittala. This going on inside the dead bones. This is the power of Japam. This repetition of Bhagavan's name, this Japam enters into the very bones of that person. A brilliant example what this Japam can do to us. This Japam can completely transform the very body and the mind of that devotee. This is what we find in Chokhamela's life. The name of Vittal had entered the very bones of his personality. Even after death, the bones were resounding with that mantra, Vittala, 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 Vittala. The whole life of practice of unceasing repetition of God's name. And the result of that we see in Chokhamela's life. One of the most inspiring examples of Japa Siddhi we can find in Chokhamela's life. So this is what Japam and repetition of God's name can do to all of us. When we unceasingly repeat Bhagavan's name, it purifies our body, it purifies our every pore of the body and the mind, and when the repetition is done with utmost love and prema for the Ishta, Ishta is the only object of prema. Our prema should not be towards anything else in this world. Love is to be given to God and God, Bhagavan and Bhagavan alone, and no other object in this world. When one repeats this Bhagavan's name with this kind of a love, the result is the very body and mind of the person is completely transformed. It becomes pure, it becomes transparent, and Bhagavan is perceived and experienced by that devotee in the depths of his heart. Then his Ishta becomes a living reality for that person. So this is the Siddhi which is attained through Japa. So I pray to Sri Ramakrishna. May Sri Ramakrishna bless us with that kind of bhakti, with that kind of Bhagavad prem. Let Sri Ramakrishna bless us with vairagya for the worldly things. May Sri Ramakrishna free our minds from the disease of worldly moha and fill our hearts with Bhagavad prem. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat.